This is cpe439 lecture 5. I had to do some ugly stuff yesterday, so not a lot in this lecture. We'll pick up a couple things. But most importantly, I've always wanted to do this. I've always thought, it's my duty to say a couple of things. And I'm sorry for the editorial. You can skip through this slide if you want, but I'm going to say a couple of things here. I would hope that everyone out there would be able to discern the difference between a leader and a follower. Now, a leader is not just someone in a position of leadership. I mean, yeah, that's the label, but you have to look at them. Are they really leading or are they simply following? Leaders make change happen. Followers, leaders make good change happen, we'll say. Followers ensure change does not happen. They're protecting the status quo. They pretend they want changes, but they do nothing to make change happen. So in a broken system, mentioning nothing that I'm familiar with, the idea here is the way to climb the ladder is to be a follower. But of course, you're going to be masquerading as a leader. So everyone pretends like they want change to happen, but most of the people in leadership positions, we'll say leadership positions, are not interested in making change happen. They're interested in protecting status quo because it's a power struggle and they have the power. For example, you have to ask yourself, we go to a school where the president got a $100,000 raise to his already bloated salary at the same time as we're cutting back on hours that we can, money that we can spend on TAs. We have less TAs, less to help students. We have students sitting in sweltering hot labs, no chance for air conditioning. Didn't that hurt their performance? So the question is that you need to ask yourself did any of our, quote, leaders stand up and say, no, this is wrong? I don't know of any. They're not really leaders. They're followers. Okay, so in the end, you don't allow your leaders to blame you for the problems that exist and that they're unwilling to solve. They're in the position to make change happen and solve problems. They choose not to. And keep in mind, if you choose to be a true leader in this life, prepare to defend yourself from armies and armies of endless followers. So the task states, what we want to do is add a new state. So these are our three known states. Running gets processor time. Ready could use processor time, but a higher priority task is running, and blocked means it's not doing anything. It's simply typically waiting for an event. But there's also a new state out there, which is the suspended state. So we didn't really talk about this, and the idea here is we did talk about deleting tasks. So when I delete a task, the object is gone. All the memory associated with that task is gone. The memory is freed. And so if I need that task again, I need to recreate it. Now, suspending a task allows that task to still exist, but it's not, the scheduler doesn't put it on its queue of things that it ever needs to consider. And so if you need to essentially use that task again, reconsider it, you can resume on that. And so this is the new timing diagram. And there's a couple things, state diagram, a couple of things about this that is worth talking about. Look, I can go from any state to the suspended state. Okay, and a couple comments on how to do that is very interesting. Actually, I put it as a question on the quiz. So the issue is that all I need to know is a task the handle of a certain task, and then I can actually suspend that task or delete that task. And another thing to notice in here is that when I'm suspended, the only thing I can do is go. Let me put this on here. If I'm suspended, the only thing I can do is resume, and the resuming state goes from being suspended, and it goes to the ready state. It doesn't go to the block state. So what else here? Resume states, enter the ready state. Yeah, we've covered all this before. The only thing interesting here that I filled in here is transitioning back and forth between the ready and running state is a function of the scheduler. So these are the two API functions for suspending and resuming states. They don't have any return values, and they operate. The arguments are essentially the task handle of the task that I intend to suspend or resume. So scheduler does review more. That was not actually a review, but look, if the scheduler decides what state it's going to run based on a couple of things, basically the current state that's running, the tasks that are in the ready state, and essentially the priorities of all those tasks. So tasks in general, they typically wait for two types of events, and when that event occurs, that task is moved to the ready state. So the events are essentially temporal and synchronization. We've talked about it's the temporal, and that are time delays. And then as far as synchronization goes, it can be external like an interrupt, or it could be internal like some other task doing something. So we have how these tasks are controlled is by the task control block. And these are the three elements of the task control block. When I create that task, the software creates all this stuff for me. So essentially what you have here is the task code, which is the instructions associated with that task. Remember that a task is like a mini program. There's a description of the task, and this is all the information that the scheduler needs to pretend like this task is a mini program. And part of that is, of course, all the individual registers in there. This is by notion temporary. I can create them, I can delete them after the program starts running. So it's going to be in RAM, and then every task is going to have some stack space, which necessarily is temporary storage in RAM as well. So yeah, all the pertinent information to make that task run as a mini program is in the task control block. I don't know. I don't know what's in there, but I know this is what I want you to take away from it. Each task has its own copy of the pertinent registers in the microcontroller. So when I make a task switch, a context switch we'll call it, it's going to take all the microcontroller's registers and stick them in the TCB of the task that's being moved out, and it's also going to move the program counter. It's going to take all the registers stored as part of the TCB of the higher priority task that's being moved in. It's going to move those into the registers, and the very last thing it does, it copies the program counter from that higher level, from the task of the higher priority into the microcontroller's PC. And once it does that, it is essentially has made the task switch. So last time we looked at two delay APIs, which are essentially kind of known as blocking calls on this thing. The delay APIs are time-based, but the time is based in ticks. Okay, it's based in system interrupts, or tick interrupts, better way to put it. There's two delays. One delays a given time from when the blocking call is made, which is VTask delay. VTask delay until is based on a time, essentially that the time from the previous blocking call, which essentially starts the timer, and it's going to delay that plus whatever time increment you put in this argument. So essentially VTask delay is pretty close, as close as you can get to being periodic. VTask delay is not necessarily that, because there could be other processing before the API call. So RTOS has a couple callback functions, and just pulled this definition off the internet somewhere, whatever. A callback function execute a code that is passed as an argument to other code that is expected to call back the argument at a given time. And so essentially a callback function is, for us, it doesn't really fit into this definition well. A callback function to us is just a function that's going to be called automatically when something happens. And what we're going to look at here, we have two we're going to look at. Is one is the idle task hook and the tick hook. And so these hooks are pretty much RTOS's preferred way of referring to a callback function. So let's look at those. Idle tasks, as you know, whenever the scheduler, all the other tasks are blocked, you need something to happen, and that's going to be the idle task. This is created automatically when you start the schedule. You don't have to worry about it. The idle task hook, or the idle callback here, is a function that executes once each time the scheduler runs the idle task. Okay, and it has a specific prototype, and programmers can change the name of this thing, but they can't change anything else. I'm sorry, they can't change the name, or they can't change anything about it. There's the prototype right there. It's just simply void. You got to use that name. You got to use those arguments and return values. So the idea here is this is something you want to keep simple. The idle task actually has some more functionality, which is essentially when you delete a task, it's responsible for doing the cleanup on that. I'm trying not to say garbage collection on that thing. Okay, so that it's going to return that storage, that the storage associated with that task is going to return it to the heap. So as you could probably imagine, a good way to kill your program is to block or suspend the idle task. If that happens, you may never survive. You may never get back. So you never block or suspend the idle task. So the tick is a periodic interrupt that FreeRTOS uses as kind of a time measurement, and essentially it's essentially a hardware timer that generates a periodic interrupt. Now, so they're associated with this is the tick hook callback, tick hook function, tick hook. Essentially, it's a function that executes once each time the tick interrupt happens. Okay, it has a specific prototype, just like the idle task callback. Programmers, you can change how it's defined, but you can't change the name, you can't change the arguments, you can't change the return value. And so there's the prototype there. The issues on this is, we haven't really talked about this yet, but this is part of an interrupt service routine. So that being the case, a couple of things: you keep it short, and there's some other issues we'll talk about later because the interrupts are special. And that lastly, the last thing this code does, the tick hook, is, I mean, let's say the interrupt has a bunch of stuff in it. The last thing the interrupt does is run the tick hook. So more details on that later. So last time we were talking about static variables, static and automatic variable declarations, and I thought we'd quickly revisit that again. So essentially, static defines a storage class, and there's only two storage classes, which is static and automatic. And it's really, it's really more simple than I ever thought. If it's static, it's in permanent memory. If it's automatic, it's in temporary memory, like on someone's stack somewhere. Okay, so we went to an example last time, but I thought we'd do this again. So first question of the day is function prototypes. We use them all the time in C. Why? What does a function prototype do? What does a function prototype do for us? Anyway, I was told by my wife, who is a compiler expert, I'll say, that the prototype serves a really basic function. So the name of the function is a token of some sorts. It's a string that the scanner and parser finds that thing and says, yeah, here's something special. Okay, so if you don't have a prototype, the compiler is going to go, I don't even know what this thing is. So you provide it with a prototype. The prototype has a token in there that is essentially the name of the function. And that means that essentially you don't need to define it there, but it's a promise to the compiler that, hey, I'm going to use this function in this program, but I promise you I will define this function somewhere else. I'm just not defining it at this point. Okay, and then this is my last example here. These are a couple variables here, and I'm using static and dynamic freely on this thing. So let's look at this one. Well, it's static, okay? Obviously, it's static, and it's going to be in permanent memory. Okay, so that's good. And by the way, I wrote it. The scope is such that this variable. Well, I'm going to take that back. Okay, and this one, static or automatic. Well, look, I don't have an automatic label on that. I mean, I don't have a static label on that, right? So it must be automatic, right? No, it's not. The issue is, this is the confusing part, is that this variable is static. Okay, so what happens is, well, what's the difference between declaring it static, having a static qualifier on it, and having no static qualifier on it? Okay, so they're both static, but the issue is this variable right here, because I declared it static, the scope of it is only in this file where this is defined. So code outside of this file does not know about this static function. So declaring it static limits visibility of this, and this is something you definitely want to do if you need to, and your program's going to work anyway. But the issue is, what I've faced in my short career here, is that a lot of people, you have a big team of programmers, and a lot of them will just plop a variable down, make it static, or in this sense global, but it has this sense they put it different. This one has global scope, this one has file scope. So they'll plop variables down there, and they'll have global scope, and it creates a shared data problem. Once you have a shared data problem, it's really hard to find. So these are both, once again, these are both static. This one, the difference being, because I put the static qualifier in it, it has file scope only. This one is global. If I'm declaring it here, but I'm going to say I should have put it in here, but I didn't. This has other files can use this variable as well, and it doesn't declare them in the other file, but it once again, very much like the function name, it's a promise to the compiler, like, hey, this is a token. I'm going to use it, and I promise you I'll define it somewhere else. And that's what the extern does on this thing. So this one is defined. I can't really see it. This is always practice here. This is defined as global scope, but if I need to use this variable in another file, I actually put the extern qualifier on it. Okay, so here's a function. This happens to be a main function, no big deal. So this is a variable here. Is it static or automatic? Well, it's automatic. This variable is declared on someone's stack somewhere, and it's probably going to be permanent because it's in the main function, but it's still in RAM. The second variable here is it's declared static. It is not on the stack. It is going to go on into permanent memory. And that, folks, is all I had. I did not finish this. Did not finish the terms and definitions because I just ran out of time, and I'll do that when I get home tonight.